Hi, everybody, and welcome to the EcoMindset Podcast. The Green Party of Ontario recently reversed its opposition to current nuclear reactors within Ontario. And this change happened at their latest policy convention held last weekend. Today, I've got a guest on our show, David Robinson. He's the person who had presented the motion to have the Green Party of Ontario change their position on this very important issue. Thank you for coming on the show, Dr. Robinson. Could you tell us a bit about this resolution and how it came to pass?
Well, it came to pass because I've been running and active in the constituency association for the last 10, 12 years. And there's an interesting oddity, and that is almost every activist in the party here has been pro-nuclear.
Okay, and these are people on the executive of your local district or on the Green Party of Ontario itself?
Well, some of them, no, we're talking about a local organization.
It's in Sudbury, Ontario that you're referring to?
This is Sudbury.
Okay.
And there's just a lot of people come through who've worked on campaigns and been on the executive, and most of them were pro-nuclear. And most of them kept their mouths shut about it because they didn't want to rock the boat and upset the many, many people in the party who are really, really religiously vehement about nuclear.
Right. I'm anti-nuclear myself. I was surprised actually that, you said that so many people in Sudbury would be pro-nuclear because, of course, the Green Party was born out of a tradition of anti-nuclear activism. And I know that the Green Party of Ontario had opposed the refurbishment of some of the nuclear facilities out there, but oddly, mostly on economic grounds rather than on environmental grounds. It was surprising to a lot of us environmentalists. You're a doctor of economics. How is it that you support nuclear, given the fact that it's so costly that there's no private insurance for it? It's the public that assumes all of the risks. Given what happened in Fukushima and elsewhere, Chernobyl, how can we justify these risks? I mean, Ontario is a place where 2/3 of the people live within 100 kilometers of a nuclear reactor. How do you explain this?
Okay, well, you've made your speech. Let me just finish with the observation.
Okay.
That as an activist in the provincial party, I also found quite a few people who were pro-nuclear. So it seemed kind of odd that it wouldn't be discussed, but essentially the pro-nuke people were being polite. They weren't ready to rock the boat.
Until now. Yeah.
Right now, my view and many people in the party is we need nuclear because we're about to kill 1 billion people or more pretty quickly. That essentially, we need all the renewables we can get and all the clean power we can get. And the science is really clear.
Okay. So that clears up where the Green Party of Ontario is at for the moment. But on the issue of nuclear itself, look, I understand that 50% of Ontario or so is, fueled by nuclear reactors at this point. So I could sort of understand, do we shut them down? How soon? How quickly? That sort of thing. What's realistic to do in, with a province of over 13 million people. But the idea of building new nuclear reactors and having Green Party support for that is something that's very controversial. How did you manage to get such a resolution through the convention? Was there a lot of opposition to it?
You need 60% in a vote on the floor. That means that 60% of the members attending the annual general meeting supported it.
And how long did this debate go on for?
Oh, the usual amount of time. I got 2 minutes. You've got to understand that when I arrived, people were already talking about this at the tables and in all the workshops on the side.
Yeah.
It was clearly the most exciting and contentious issue that was coming before the meeting.
Okay.
We put a clean motion on the floor that had gone through the policy committee that had lots of support in terms of people willing to sign to it. If you think that annual general meetings are at all representative, is that there is a majority in the party. I wouldn't go that far at this point. I would say it's now no longer supportable that to assume there's not a majority. That's a pretty mild observation. What it looks like is that nuclear support in the Green Party is far greater than people have realized.
Well, I think that, with as the years go on, anti-nuclear activism is something that really the previous generation has taken up. And I think that it's something that hasn't really been transferred down that well to the younger generation. Like, I think about, my father, for example, was, telling me stories about the Cold War and stuff like that. People maybe had felt the threat, of nuclear weapons, were a little bit closer in terms of time to the dropping of nuclear bombs on Japan.
But Alex, it's true that the Green Party saw nuclear power as a source of and a possible way of producing nuclear weapons. Yeah. It's absolutely true that back in 1980 or about there, that was the fear. It was, as you suggest, fear of nuclear weapons.
Well, not just fear of nuclear weapons, but also, the impacts from the extraction of uranium and the, the emissions of radiation.
People were terrified. Look, back in the
people still are terrified. There's still people in Canada that are suffering the effects of uranium extraction. Here in Quebec, we were lucky enough to shut down the only nuclear reactor that we had and close the door completely to any form of uranium extraction. This is all within the last 10 years. And it's not just the Green Party that's advocated for this, but it's, the entire environmental movement and, managed to convince the government as well to say no to uranium extraction. Saskatchewan.
It's your show and you can make a speech.
Right.
Is Quebec considering restarting that nuclear reactor?
Well, look, there's been a little bit of talk about it, but it's not very serious, and there's a lot of opposition to it, and the Green Party certainly stands strongly opposed to it.
Look, 2 years ago, the Green Party, members of the Green Party were telling me that Ontario will never build another reactor. Okay, it turns out you were wrong. 2 years ago, people were saying, 5 years ago, people were saying in the party repeatedly, everybody is terrified of nuclear. Well, it's more than 50% support across the Canadian population. Ontario's building them. We're selling them abroad again. There are scars on Canada from our mining, from our agriculture, from our forestry, from our uranium, from our dumping sewerage, from just about everything human beings do. This is not special and it's not big by comparison. You want to worry about the environment? The industry that does most damage to the environment is agriculture. Meat eating is a million times worse. Million times
fair enough,
worse.
And we want to reduce the consumption of meat in the population in general. I mean, comparing agricultural and nuclear is a little bit different because people need to eat, right? They don't need to consume nuclear energy.
They don't need power, is what you said.
There's other ways to get power other than nuclear energy, but there are not other ways to eat other than agriculture.
There's other ways to get calories than the 80% of agricultural land that's dedicated to meat.
Oh, fair enough. I mean, I'm not going to argue with you on the meat aspect.
Okay, so all I would put to you is this is a question of proportion, and the dangers of nuclear are tiny, and the dangers of climate change are huge, and we are not going to decarbonize fast enough. We will lose 1 billion people, and we can probably save millions simply by expanding nuclear in addition to other sources of clean power. That's the calculation. Take it or leave it. I don't mind. I mean, we're not here to argue the virtues.
We're here to debate, right? Yeah.
Pardon?
We're here to debate, right?
Well, I didn't come prepared to debate you about it. I came prepared to tell you what the motion was,
right,
and what it tells us about the party.
Yeah.
Fact is, this motion tells us that the largest segment of the Green Party in Canada supports nuclear officially.
Well, it says that the people at the meeting in a majority of 60% are more supported. I mean, does it go further than that?
I know, but
time will tell, I guess. But
you've got a process that the party set up intending to be as democratic as possible. We went through the procedure. The majority at that meeting. The fact is, somewhere near half of the party supports nuclear power, and that means the Green Party is in a crisis of conscience.
So that was my interview with David Robinson, the person from the Green Party of Ontario who presented the motion at their convention, which overturned a long-standing opposition to nuclear energy within the Green Party of Ontario. To my knowledge, this is the first Green Party in Canada that has taken such a stance. And I'm joined today by Naomi Hunter, the leader of the Saskatchewan Green Party. Naomi just recently finished an election campaign in which the Saskatchewan Green Party was the only party that was opposed to nuclear energy out in Saskatchewan. So it's really an issue that set her party aside from the NDP and from the Saskatchewan Party. Naomi, what do you think about this change to this long-standing opposition to nuclear power that we've seen in the Green Party of Ontario?
Well, the nuclear industry has done a very long education campaign. They have targeted environmentalists. They're trying to convince people that this is a climate solution. So I would say that this is more telling of the fact that the nuclear industry has thrown so much money at education campaigns to try to win people over to this kind of belief system. Unfortunately, what they are saying is simply untrue. It's such a fallacy. It's not a climate solution. In fact, it's kicking us further down the road of climate disaster. And here in Saskatchewan, where 47% of the world's uranium is mined, up in the far north, Indigenous people were not experiencing cancers. Now, 1 in every 8 individuals at Fishing Lake has cancer. Incredibly high statistics. You can actually see in northern Saskatchewan animals and fish with third eyes and cancers, just tumors all over the bodies of animals that have been living in the area where these tailing ponds, where the mining is occurring. So we're in a unique position in Saskatchewan to be able to speak to some of the issues that I find the nuclear industry tends to just gloss over.
Yeah, actually, Dr. Robinson sort of laughed off some of the issues when I was talking about mining uranium. And while I was pointing out that Quebec and Nova Scotia and British Columbia have all banned uranium mining. In the case of Quebec, with the support of the Green Party, I went and participated in the public consultations. But Quebec shut down its nuclear reactor and also closed the door to any form of uranium exploration or exploitation. So I think a lot of people that are promoting nuclear don't realize the impacts that the extraction of the uranium is having on people. And I know that there's a lot of Indigenous people, particularly in Saskatchewan, who are affected by uranium extraction.
Yes. And the thing is that this is happening often without the full consent. In Saskatchewan, all land is treaty land. And there has been strong opposition in the north here for a very long time to this industry. And because the north is underpopulated compared to the rest of the province, these words are often not listened to. People's views are not heard. But we're talking about an industry that has a waste product. Now, really, nuclear has only really been used for a couple hundred years, really,
or even less, right?
Yeah. But I mean, even exploration and scientific thought into it is a very, very short timeline. And yet the waste product is something that will take tens of thousands, possibly hundreds of thousands of years. It will still be toxic. Now, one thing that I always like to say to people is the Rosetta Stone. Here's something that, over a relatively short time period, right? Like a couple thousand years, it was almost impossible to decipher the Rosetta Stone. So when we're talking about nuclear waste, what language are you going to use to identify these sites so that our great-grandchildren and our great-great-grandchildren actually are able to decipher the fact that this is a toxic site? We also have no real way of containing these tailings. Time and again, we've seen images where containment units are leaking. There is no safe way of storing the byproducts of nuclear waste and nuclear power. And the industry just tries to gloss over this and say, well, we're looking into new solutions. Leave it in the ground.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. David Robinson was particularly pushing this as a climate solution. I think that it's one of those false climate solutions similar to electric vehicles where, there's a large incentive for people to believe in something like that. Like they really want it to be true. They really want this to be this magical solution where we just build these nuclear reactors and avert climate change and that sort of thing. But it's not really that simple. And there is CO2 that's generated from the nuclear process, particularly in the extraction. There's the issue also of the long-term geological storage. I know that Canada is looking for a new site to store nuclear waste. Did you have any up-to-date information on that?
Well, Northern Ontario has been looked at numerous times. Northern Saskatchewan was looked at. It was rejected here. But currently, Northern Ontario is actually where this is being discussed. And there are so many issues where they try to say that this is an environmental solution, but even in the building of a nuclear power plant, the footprint and the amount of concrete used, the amount of materials used actually will outdo almost any other type of electricity generation possible. As well, trying to say that this is an ecological solution and it's the only one that's really going to work is ridiculous in a province like Ontario or Saskatchewan or any of the other conservative premier provinces where this is being proposed. Because the fact of the matter is they haven't actually tried to convert over to other sources of clean energy. They have not actually tried to transition to geothermal, solar, wind.
Even Ontario said no to taking Quebec's hydroelectricity, and we ended up signing contracts with Massachusetts and the state of New York instead. So there's a huge opportunity there for renewable, but obviously there's issues also with hydroelectric dams and that sort of thing. But I guess they really sort of missed the boat on that one, and now they've refurbished their nuclear plants in Ontario. The Green Party of Ontario had opposed the refurbishment, mostly on economic grounds rather than environmental, which is odd. Because if you look at the statistics, 2/3 of the Canadian population lives within 100 kilometers of a nuclear reactor. This is mostly because these reactors are concentrated in southern Ontario, close to the densest part of the population in terms of population. So,
incidentally, they are located in the areas closest to our largest freshwater reserves on the planet.
Exactly. Every single nuclear generating facility is next to a body of water because of the cooling. So we saw it happen in Japan with the tsunami that came and overwhelmed the pumps. And I remember watching that incident back in 2011 and seeing, them dumping salt water by helicopter onto the ponds where the fuel was being stored underwater and beginning to overheat. It really showed me how unprepared the global community is to deal with meltdowns at nuclear reactors. You would think that there would be like an international force that when something like that happened, that there would be planes with hundreds and thousands of people that would be landing there to go in and intervene in the nuclear reactor for 2 minutes each and then leave. But there didn't seem to be a lot of cooperation like that. It seemed to be that they were improvising the plans as it was happening. There's also a huge amount of radioactive water that was released into the Pacific Ocean. Traces of that were picked up off the coast of BC. And even with that, it's, we avoided the worst case scenario, right? Like luckily it could have been much, much worse. But we managed to avoid it. And ironically, Dr. Robinson was saying how, well, it's not a big deal. Nobody died from that and nobody died from any nuclear accident ever. Well, these things are very difficult to calculate. And in terms of Quebec, like our nuclear facility, one of the reasons that it was shut down was that there was a higher cancer rate in proximity to that nuclear generating station. And, when discussing this with, one of Canada's leading anti-nuclear activist, Dr. Gordon Edwards, he told me that, nuclear power plants, they let off a bit of radiation, right? It's kind of like a car, like letting off a bit of pollution. Like it's not contained 100%. So there's a lot of people that are suffering the consequences. And like the nuclear industry would say that case in Quebec, that the population was not large enough to, make it statistically significant. But at the same time, those people are sick. And I know there's people in Saskatchewan that are sick. And even though, radiation may not be an instant killer, it's the kind of thing that can lead to cancers developing later on in life. So even with respect to the Chernobyl disaster that happened, I believe it was in 1986, and that cloud of radioactive material that went over Eastern Europe, those people, are still alive, right? Like people born in 1986 are going to be, turning 40 in a couple years. Like, who's to say that they're not affected by that? I mean, you can't really make a conclusion until the people have completed their life expectancy. So there's a lot of, posturing by the pro-nuclear folks and a lot of dismissal of any kind of problem. Like they seem to dismiss absolutely everything.
Well, and the thing is that when we're talking about a power system, that when there is a catastrophic event, it can have the most devastating environmental impact of anything that we can even begin to imagine on planet Earth. It's not even comparable to current sources of power generation. Right now, Vancouver Island has most of the island is out of power at the moment, but we're not seeing devastation across half the planet because of that. Whereas the failure of one nuclear power plant, one cataclysmic event, can cause such devastation that we might see portions of the only livable planet that there is, the only place that we can call home, could be affected on such a level that we might never recover as a species. So when we talk in terms of this, we need to always remember that we saw with Chernobyl the tip of the iceberg of what's possible with a cataclysmic nuclear event. What we also need to link in here is the fact that nuclear power plants and their waste are integral in the production of nuclear weapons and other weapons of war that are used around the world. And again, because Saskatchewan, here in Canada, where I live, is ground zero for the extraction of 47% of the world's uranium. And so and this gets used. We are now talking about exporting nuclear power plants and parts of them all over the world again. Well, we are then absolutely implicit in the means of the production of war and people dying all over the planet.
In fact, the nuclear bombs that were dropped on Japan, there was part of that development work that was done in Ontario at the Chalk River facility. So Canada has already had a role in the dropping of the first nuclear weapon. Also with respect to warfare, it's that when you have these facilities, they can become targets. Right?
Yes.
If they're bombed by another country in the midst of a war, it's a way that can really devastate a huge amount of territory. I mean, imagine if there were areas around those nuclear generating plants in Ontario that became unusable for hundreds of years because of such an event. I mean, the whole population is concentrated there. The Great Lakes are there. There's a huge amount of fragility in that area. It's not like the nuclear plants are way far off in uninhabited lands. They were right next to the population centers and right next to the drinking water centers as well.
And with Green parties, one of our core values is peace and nonviolence. We are literally built in the peace movement. And this is something that is seen in Green parties all over the world. The global green movements are absolutely linked to peace and social justice. And we can't just throw our hands up and pretend that there is no link between nuclear power and the means of nuclear war.
Right.
And other weapons. So many of them use components and waste from nuclear power plants. And so this is one of the things that the nuclear industry tries to dismantle, is the strong links between weapons of mass destruction and nuclear power. The same cannot be said of any other power source. And once again, I would like to say that the places in Canada that are talking about nuclear power being a solution haven't actually tried moving over to other forms of clean energy that are readily available right now on a timeline that the climate crisis actually needs. We're seeing cataclysmic weather events all over the planet, and nuclear power isn't, even on a timeliness level, we need something that can get us to where we need to be within the next 2 to 4 years. Whereas nuclear power is a 10-year solution. And the small modular nuclear reactors that are being talked about now by Saskatchewan, Ontario, and the East Coast and other places, well, these are theoretical technologies that actually haven't been built at all yet. So we need to look to actually treating the climate crisis like the very short time limit emergency that it is. And that does not involve nuclear.
Right. And it certainly does not involve building nuclear plants to power electric vehicles and to continue our dependence on the private vehicle, especially in places like Southern Ontario where everything is so dense, everything is so close by that it's a perfect place to set up public transit and to not be over-reliant on the private vehicles. One thing that I gathered from the interview with David Robinson is that these people seem very determined to have perhaps, the Green Party of Canada as well overturn its longstanding opposition to nuclear. And so while I was talking with them, I felt that, this is really going to be a debate that could take a lot of space within the party over the next few years. And I think that for people like us who are opposed to nuclear and who are in positions of influence within the party, they're sort of giving us the challenge, to mount an opposition campaign to this pro-nuclear drive that they're pushing.
We must speak up. We must make sure that we're heard. We have to make sure that people clearly understand why our party is rooted in this opposition and rally support to this point of view, because the very ability of life on Earth depends on it.
Yeah. And it's important for the Green Party to stick to its roots as well, right? It's not just because a party has the name Green that they're going to uphold all of the founding principles from 40 years ago. So I think as much on nuclear power as on, issues of peace and warfare that, we have to make sure that we're constantly staying true to the roots and to the founding principles and values of this global movement that we're a part of.
Just think that this is very, very dangerous. We cannot let it just slide on by. It's so important that we be that voice of opposition in Canada, because we're needed more now than ever. This is our time. This is what we have been preparing for all these years, and we must be strong. We need to make sure that this plan of action does not go forward, and that we educate the public as much as possible. I urge everyone to door knock in between elections, get out there, talk to people, and make sure that everyone understands this issue in a way that isn't glossed over and what's been made available by the nuclear industry.
Well, thank you very much, Naomi Hunter, leader of the Saskatchewan Green Party. I think we've got our work cut out for us, and we're going to have to continue following this issue and making sure that the Green Party maintains its opposition to nuclear power, nuclear weapons, and also warfare going forward. So thank you very much for coming on the podcast, The EcoMindset.
Thank you for having me.